Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of the Weekend Weird Files. I'm your host, Andrea. This weekend show isn't so weird, but it's something that I thought that we should talk about just because.
Triple M Studios proudly presents the Weekend Weird Files, and here's your host, the weirdest one of all, Andrea Louie.
I'm still thinking about getting rid of that one and finding something else. So, now before we get started with this week's Weekend Weird Files, I just want to say I learned today about the passing of Joey Jordison. I've been a Slipknot fan for years. I don't even really know how long. So to hear that news, it really broke my heart. He was such a talented drummer. I don't even know what to say. I do have one little experience to share about Joey. It was back in 2009 when they were on tour. Me and my daughter had tickets to see him, but the day of the concert was like 2 days before I was supposed to give birth to her little brother Nick, and I was way too pregnant to be in a mosh pit, so she went on without me with one of her friends, and she came home. She was so excited, and Joey had handed her one of his drumsticks. So, you know, that's just a memory that she'll always have. But anyway, I don't want the music to be like louder than me. But anyway, let's get started with this week's Weekend Weird Files. So, what is this non-weird thing that we're going to talk about today? Well, one of America's most notorious serial killers passed away last week. His name was Rodney Alcala, and he's also known as the dating game killer. So today we're talking about who he was, what he did, and why he was called the dating game killer. And this may end up being a bit longer than what I normally record for the Weekend Weird File, so I hope you don't mind. Well, here we go. So Rodney Alcala was born on August 23rd, 1943 in San Antonio, Texas. He was the son of a Mexican-American couple, and when he was only 8 years old, his father moved the family to Mexico. But then, after they had been there for only 3 years, his father abandoned them. In 1954, his mom decided to move Rodney and his two sisters to Los Angeles, and when Rodney was 17 years old, he enlisted in the U.S. Army and served as a clerk. Well, 3 years after joining the Army, he had what he described as a nervous breakdown, and he went AWOL. He ended up walking from Fort Bragg to his mom's home, and it turns out that he did have what a military psychiatrist diagnosed as antisocial disorder. So he was discharged from the Army on grounds of medical reasons. Now, once he was out of the Army, he graduated from the UCLA School of Fine Arts, and get this, he even studied film under Roman Polanski at New York University later on. Now, as far as anyone knows, Alcala, he committed his first crime in 1968 when a witness saw him lure an 8-year-old girl into his apartment in Hollywood, and the witness called the police. Well, when the police got there, the little girl had been raped and beaten with a steel bar, but Alcala was nowhere to be seen, so warrants were issued for his arrest. Well, it seems that Alcala had made his way across the country to New York, enrolled in the NYU Film School, and was using the alias John Berger, spelled Berger. Then in 1971, he got a counselor's job at an art camp for children in New Hampshire, and this time he was using the alias John Berger. Sounds the same, but it was spelled Burger. During this time in that area, a TWA flight attendant named Cornelia Crilly was found strangled and raped in her Manhattan apartment. Now, there was no evidence at the time to tie Alcala to her murder, and her case was cold until 2011. Now, we're going to talk more about that in just a little bit. Now, Alcala was nowhere to be found while they were searching for him for what he did to the 8-year-old girl. So, the FBI added him to their 10 most wanted fugitives in 1971. 2 kids that had attended the camp that Alcala was a counselor at recognized him on a most wanted poster at the post office, and they basically turned him in to police, and soon he was extradited back to California. Well, the little girl that he had raped had moved with her family to Mexico, and her parents didn't want her testifying at his trial, so all he ended up being convicted of was child molestation, and he was sentenced to just 3 years. But without the little girl's testimony, they were unable to convict him of like the rape and attempted murder charges. But Alcala wouldn't spend the entire 3 years in prison. He was paroled after only 17 months behind bars. He basically was given a slap on the wrist for what he did to that little girl. And when he gets out, what does he do? He gets arrested again less than 2 months later for assaulting a 13-year-old girl. Apparently, Alcala offered the girl a ride to school, but he only did that to lure her into his vehicle. From that crime, he served just 2 years. After he was released that time, his parole officer in L.A. gave him permission to travel to New York. Now, why on earth would such a violent offender, and also he has proven to be a flight risk, why would he be allowed to travel away from where he was being supervised? Well, Alcala wasted no time once he got in the Big Apple. NYPD cold case investigators now believe that only a week after he arrived in Manhattan, he murdered 23-year-old Ellen Jane Hover, whose remains were found buried on the grounds of the Rockefeller Estate in Westchester County. Now, Jane was the daughter of the owner of a popular Hollywood nightclub, and she was also the goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. Well, shortly after that, he went back to L.A., and he was convincing hundreds of young women and men that he was a professional photographer looking for models. They were asked to pose nude, and most of the photos were sexually explicit, including the ones he took of teenage boys. Now, okay, he's just a creep. So that following year, which was 1978, Alcala appeared on the very popular 1970s game show called The Dating Game. Now, if that was before your time, it was basically like a game show where a man or a woman would be allowed so much time to ask questions to 3 women or 3 men, whatever the case may be. But they couldn't see who they were talking to. There was like a wall between them. Well, when their time was up, the person asking the questions had to decide which of the 3 he or she would like to take on a date. When Jim Lang, the host of the show, introduced Alcala, he said that Alcala was, quote, a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the darkroom at the age of 13, fully developed. Between takes, you might find him skydiving or motorcycling, end quote. I'm going to see if I can find a video of him on the show and post it to our Twitter and Facebook accounts so y'all can see. I remember seeing it a couple of years ago and thought, man, what a creep. But anyway, one of the other contestants that was on the show with him described him as being a very strange guy with bizarre opinions. I bet he was. Now, in the episode that he appeared on, he was one of the 3 bachelors that a bachelorette was to choose from. And the bachelorette from this episode, Cheryl Bradshaw, refused to go out with him because she found him creepy. After he was rejected by Cheryl, at least 3 more women were murdered, and has been asked if the rejection is what led him to murder these women. Now, to me, that does sound logical, but he was already killing women before he was rejected by this woman that he had met on a TV show. Now, it absolutely makes no sense to me that he was chosen to be a contestant on the show, because at that time he'd already been found guilty of molesting a child, and he was a registered sex offender. But I'm glad that Cheryl Bradshaw went with her intuition and didn't go out with him. I mean, who knows what would have happened to her. Now, the next year, a 12-year-old girl named Robin Samso disappeared from Huntington Beach while she was on her way to her ballet class. 12 days later, her decomposing corpse was found in the foothills of L.A. Some of Robin's friends told police that a stranger had approached him on the beach asking to take their pictures, and they were able to give the police a description that a sketch was made from. And so the police started circulating this sketch in hopes of catching their suspect. And it was Alcala's parole officer who recognized him in the sketch. Well, while searching his mom's house, police found a rental receipt for a storage locker in Utah. Not in Utah. Sorry. Gosh, where did I go with that? In Seattle. Okay, sorry. The storage locker was in Seattle. And when it was searched, they found Robin's earrings. In July of 1979, Alcala was arrested and held without bail. The following year, he was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death for Robin's murder, but that conviction was overturned by the California Supreme Court because the jury in that trial had been improperly informed of his previous sex crimes. Excuse me. In 1986, another trial was held, and he was again convicted and sentenced to death. That conviction was overturned by a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals panel, partly because a witness was not allowed to support Alcala's contention that the park ranger who had found Robin's body had been, quote, hypnotized by the police, end quote. Well, as the prosecution was preparing for a third trial in 2003, investigators in Orange County, California, learned that Alcala's DNA matched semen that was left at the scenes of 2 Los Angeles women's rapes and murders. In 2004, more DNA evidence and new murders was found against Alcala, and he was indicted for the murders of 4 more women. Those murders had all happened between 1977 and 1979. All of these women's bodies had been posed in a particular way, and the earrings of one of those victims was found in the same storage locker that Robin's earrings had been found in. Now, while he was awaiting his third trial and still incarcerated, Alcala wrote and self-published a book titled You the Jury. In it, he claims to be innocent in the murder of Robin Samso, and even suggested another suspect. Also, during this time, he filed 2 lawsuits against California, the California penal system. Sorry, not the state, but the penal system in California for a slip and fall accident that he had had. And, get this, because they hadn't provided him a low-fat diet. Well, in 2003, prosecutors filed a motion to have the trials for the new murders to be joined with the trial for the murder of Robin Samso. Alcala's defense attorneys protested, saying that it would be hard to have reasonable doubt in a trial of 5 murders, especially with DNA evidence being presented. But in 2006, the California Supreme Court ruled in favor of the prosecutors, and a new trial finally began in February of 2010. In the third trial, Alcala represented himself, and he even took the stand in his own defense. Now, this part, I can't help but laugh. And maybe it's not funny, but he's a very strange man, okay? He was on the stand for 5 hours. He played the role of the interrogator and the witness, and get this, he referred to himself as Mr. Alcala, using a deeper voice than normal. So basically, he would change his voice to ask himself the questions. Now, he never really made an attempt to dispute the 4 new charges other than saying he didn't remember killing them. In his closing argument, he played the song Alice's Restaurant by Arlo Guthrie. And in this song, the protagonist tells the psychiatrist that he wants to kill. Why on earth you would play that, I have no idea. Well, the jury deliberated for less than 2 days and came back with a conviction on all 5 first-degree murder charges. In the penalty phase, the little girl who he had raped and beaten, that was his first victim, was a surprise witness. In March of 2010, Alcala was sentenced to death for a 3rd time. Now, the following January, he was indicted by a Manhattan grand jury for the murders of Cornelia Crilly and Ellen Hover. And in June of 2012, he was extradited and entered a plea of guilty. But in that following December, he changed both pleas to guilty. And his reason for that was so that he could return to California to pursue appeals for death penalty conviction there. In January of 2013, a Manhattan judge sentenced Alcala to 25 years in prison because the death penalty was no longer an option in the state of New York as of 2007. Now, there's some other cases that are thought to be linked to him, but there wasn't enough evidence to bring him to trial for them. And as a matter of fact, get this, y'all. Authorities say he could be responsible for as many as 130 murders. 130 murders, y'all. So fast forward to 2019, and California Governor Gavin Newsom signed an order halting all executions in the state, so Alcala would basically never be executed. However, he died on death row of natural causes a week ago today at the age of 77. I have zero sympathy for this man. He obviously had plenty of mental issues, but I think he knew. I mean, of course he knew that after he was medically discharged from the army. If only he had gotten help, you know. And of course we could say that about lots of serial killers, but anyway. That's all I really have for today. Now, I told y'all it was going to be a little longer than my normal weekend episodes. Thanks for hanging out with me this morning. And don't forget to come back on Monday for an all-new episode of Mystery, Murder, and Magic. Y'all have a good rest of your weekend.